So the path of a soccer ball can be modeled by the relation h equal negative 0.1 d squared plus 0.5 d plus 0.6, where h is the ball's height and d is the horizontal distance from the kicker, both measured in meters. So I have the height of the ball and the distance from the player. Find the zeros of the relation. What does that mean? What are we looking for?
The x. Wait. The.
What are we looking for? The zeros, which means what form?
Factored.
Factored form.
I knew it was.
I told you, you're going to have to read the question. You're going to have to determine what form do you have to put it in. Right? So, I'm looking for factored form. What do I do when I'm factoring? Greatest common factor. What would it be? Negative 0.1. So I'm going to divide everything by negative 0.1. Right? So if I divide everything by negative 0.1, what do I get? So d squared, negative 5d, negative 6. Okay, so if I divide 0.5 by negative 0.1, you will get negative 5, and if you divide 0.6 by negative 0.1, you're going to get negative 6. Now, I did my common factor. What's next?
Sum and product.
Sum and product, because it is because it's 3 terms, right? So I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to what and add to what? Negative 6, guys. Add to negative 5. So both B and C are negative. So that means I'm looking for a large of negative and a small of positive. All right. Throw at me. Sorry. 1 and 5. 1 and 6. What did you say? Sorry. 3 and 2. Okay. So the bigger one is negative. So that's negative 3 and 2. Does it add to negative 5? No, that adds to negative 1. Okay. Give me other numbers that multiply to 6. Negative 6 and 1. Does it add to negative 5? So these are my factors. Okay? So when you plug it in, it's going to be d minus 6, d plus 1. Okay? So the factors are going to plug in as is in your formula. So what are your zeros?
6 and
D equals 6. So, if I'm looking at this, negative 1 and 6. So the ball is going to be on the ground. Negative 1, so this is the kicker. Negative 1 is 1 meter behind the kicker. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? No. So sometimes we can ignore some of the zeros that we get depending on the scenario. Okay? In this case, the distance from the player. Negative 1, that means it's behind the player. Okay? If the player is kicking it, he's probably kicking it off his foot or her foot, right? So that's why it's not on the ground. Okay? So I can probably ignore this, but for now I'm gonna leave it. And then the ball is gonna go up. It's gonna reach a maximum height, and then it's gonna come back down 6 meters away from the kicker. So the zero in the context of this question is when the ball hits the ground. So that means the ball will hit the ground when 6 meters away from the kicker. Few things, guys, that I need you to focus on. When you're reading the question, I want you to draw your X and Y, okay? Put your X and Y and label them. So if when I label this, I label it as, okay, this is the height of the ball. And label it like, don't be, how do you say this? Like, don't be cheap or frugal when you're writing things down. Like, write it, right? So this way it's easier for you to understand the content of the question, okay? So height of the ball, right? When I'm looking at the X, distance from the kicker. Write them. It will be easier for you to understand what the question is asking you for once you label these things. Okay? Then you can see, then you can visualize. So in this case, I didn't really have to worry about this part of the graph, right? So technically, this part of the graph doesn't count in this scenario, right? Because all what I care about is from the moment that he kicked the ball, the kicker kicked the ball, it's going to reach a maximum and then it's going to go and fall on the ground 6 meters away from it. Okay? So technically speaking, I'm ignoring this part. Let's look at the second question. The arch of a small suspension bridge with a river can be modeled by the equation y equal negative 2x squared plus 4x plus 6, where x is the distance in meter from the edge of the river and y is the height above the ground, also in meter. So x is what? What does x represent? It's written.
The distance in meters.
Distance
The river.
in meter from the edge of the river. What does y represent?
The height above the ground.
Height. We're talking about a bridge here, right? Above the ground. Okay? So basically, your river is going to be your y-axis, right? Because the distance, the arc is going to be looking like this, right? You have the river, right? Then you have an arc that's on top, or a bridge on top of the river. Okay? So you're going to have a bridge, part of the bridge on each side of the river. Make sense? Now, what are the zeros and what do they represent? How do you find the zeros? Factor. What's the first thing I need to do when I'm factoring? Which is? -2. So I can divide each by -2. So I have x squared minus 2x minus 3. Okay, I took my greatest common factor out. What's next? Sum and product. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to -3, add to -2. both of them are negative. That means I'm looking at the large number to be negative, the small to be positive. What multiplies to negative 3? Negative 3 and 1. Because I'm looking for a large negative number, right? Does it add to negative 2?
Yes.
Perfect. So that means that factors to x minus 3, x plus 1. We cool with that? So what are your zeros?
3 and -1.
So if I look at this bridge, eyes on me for a second. So negative 1 and 3. Can I ignore the negative 1 in this scenario? If I ignore the negative 1, that means I'm ignoring part of the bridge. Is that okay? No. So I have to use both of these answers. So that's why I always tell you, think about your question. Sometimes you ignore the negative part, but sometimes you don't. Which means if your river is here, right, that means part of the river is going to be 1 meter on the left, and the other part is going to be 3 meter on the right. Okay? Because your river, right, so this is your river, right? Your bridge, part of it is 1 meter to the left, and then the other part is going to end up 3 meter from the right. Does that make sense? Now, what does that mean? What do they represent, the zeros? They represent the distance when the bridge is on the ground, right? The distance from the river edge when the bridge is touching the ground. Horizontally, how long is the bridge? 4 meters. Why? Right? So if you're going to look at horizontally how long it is, it starts from negative 1 to 3. That's a 4 meter long. Right? So the bridge is 4 meter. You guys are going to solve the next question by yourself. Okay, read the question carefully, graph a sketch it, okay, and see what you guys can, how can you solve this question.